The NIGGA is the creation of America. America created the N-word. He created that personality that, let me see, what happens if I rape your women, if I strip you down, if I bar you from being a man, if I make you a breeder, if I make you work all day, if I don't acknowledge that you're a human being, what kind of person will that create? And then they created this angry, hostile, anxious, docile, unable to stand for himself person that is out of control, right? That's the N-word. That's the creation. So, and then America comes back later after it creates it and says, I don't like him.
The N-word goes back to Spaniards seeking to replace indigenous labor with African labor, and of course Spanish-speaking people referring to Africans as negros, right, blacks. And as time went on, as the English began to invest in the slave trade and bring Africans to the New World as well, we begin to see Anglicization of this word Negro. And so over time it has devolved from Negro to the N-word as we know it.
I had grandparents who were from Missouri and Kansas, and I recall at a very early age them using the N-word. And they used the N-word about school friends I had. And it seemed a little odd to me. I didn't fully understand why they were using that word. Over time, it began to be just seen as a word used for a group of people. But then, of course, I lived in the late 50s and 60s when the civil rights movement was coming to a head. And at that point, I was growing up in Santa Ana, where there was a lot of racial and ethnic issues going on. And then I left home and ended up on the streets, and my black friend Tyrone Tripp brought me to his house and asked his mom if I could stay with them. So I actually moved into the garage of an African-American family in the 60s while a lot of this stuff was going on. I heard the word differently in the black community than I had heard it in the white community about the black community. So it was interesting to see that different perspective.
I don't mind black people in general saying it to each other, but I will not have anybody that's white, Mexican, Asian, anybody that's not more than 75% black say the word, because like, no, I'm serious. If you're not 50 or above, it don't count. But like, from where it came from, okay, the white man gave us that term, but we had to stick with it, and that's all we were called. So we further took that term and made it a term of endearment of how we talk to each other, as in like, hey, what's up? This is blood, you know, stuff like that. So for black people, that's just like a hey, how you doing, hi, goodbye. That's like the, you know, wham bam, what do you call it, like a family pack type thing. But if like somebody that's not black's gonna call you that, they haven't been through that suffering and stuff like that we've been through, in order for them to be able to say that word.
It's kind of like, okay, you know what I'm saying? You can greet somebody and you can be like, oh, what's up, my, you know what I'm saying? And that'd be cool. But you can't be like, shut up, you know what I'm saying? Cause then that's bad context. That's negative connotation. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
To be honest, I use it a little bit. Just because I think I just got accustomed to using it. Initially, I think like when I was younger, I used to think, oh, like it's a cuss word. And then like throughout high school, it was more like, I kind of saw it as like, oh, like that's my, you know, like it was more like a word for endearment. Is that how you say it? And then I was kind of, and then my parents were like, oh nah, like that's a slave mentality word, kind of thing. And honestly, like I still use it now. I'm trying not to use it as much, but I don't necessarily, I feel like it's context mostly, because it's like, yeah, back then it was the word, like, well, the actual word where it originated from. I just feel like, yeah, that's bad. but like we turned it into something that brings us together. Like it brings like Black people together.
What we see post-emancipation is like any language, the language evolving, and Black people using that one word in one of three ways, both as community, both as rebellion, and as a derogatory word amongst one another. And it's also, people would say that that's the Black community co-opting the N-word. Instead of being called it, they call themselves that first. And there's a certain amount of power in that, right? So before you call me a name, I'm gonna call myself that name, which takes the power away from you.
When a group takes control of the slur that's used against them, they somewhat disarm it in the other community.
Gonzalez and Chavez use this term adjectivity to describe Latino migrants in America and they're being kind of on the outside or on the outskirts of the mainstream. They found that the migrants themselves found solidarity together in the identity that was being put on them by the mainstream. Because of that language of oppression, they found that they took on that identity. And so I think that is a very a common thing that happens when for an oppressed people group from any particular culture or subculture.
Oppression has a funny way of not only holding on to your brain, but holding on to your spirit. And I believe that as I got spiritually liberated, as I came to understand who I am to God and who God is to me, that there were certain things that just no longer were comfortable coming out of my mouth, right? And the N-word became one of those words that I'm no longer comfortable using that word because I can't have clean water and dirty water, coming out of the same mouth. I consider that word just as profane as other words that are considered profane.
If you ain't got melanin, it's not for you. Like, just don't use it. So I'm hoping that the evolution of the N-word will be that people who have not earned their right into that word will not be using it.
I feel like a lot of people feel that it's like they get a pass or like it's comfortable because it's so like commonly used like in music, and that it's like all right to just just because it's in the music, like it's in the lyrics, like you can just say it. But like I don't think it's okay to just be throwing it out there because like people do take offense to that.
No one should, who's not Black especially, that doesn't understand the full effect of it being called to them or someone being called that in a very negative way. They wouldn't understand that because it's just like it's a word. But if we use any derogatory term that would offend them, I'm pretty sure that they would have taken offense to it. But it's not catchy like the N-word for some reason. Like it doesn't stick as much.
It's context, but at the same time, you can tell when it's like being like genuinely used rather than somebody just like saying it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's context thing at the end of the day.
If you have like 99% of a group of people who are continually using the word without understanding what the word means, and you're saying it out here blatantly, people are gonna catch on. We had to start with that thought. What do we want to say, and how do we want to impact the world?
The more that I acknowledge my brother as being the N-word, I actually give life to him or to her being that. And for me being able to treat them like that.
That word is very easily switched. That if someone wants to be offensive towards a Black person, that's their go-to word. It's not a moment where people are like, oh, this word is used so often that if I call them that, they're not going to be offended. People know that there's a difference.
Anthropologist, there's a linguist named Jane Hill who talks about this, and she examines hip-hop language culture and says, like, within this linguistic community, something called linguistic competence that we have that demonstrates like our belonging within a community. Those terms can become very sacred within a community, right? That users within this community are the people that within this community are the people who use this language. And so when somebody takes that language and uses it outside of that context, it profanes what has been made sacred. And the question of what is sacred and profane within a culture differs from how that's appropriated and taken outside of a culture.
Coming from family down in Tennessee and in Memphis, if a white person, because there's a lot of racism down south, if a white person walks up to you and calls you a, like out here towards California, it's more light, it's more fun, but down there, if they're calling you that, they're still stinging you back into the mindset that we should have never freed you guys, and if we did not, we would still be a wealthy country.
It's hard to kill a word. It's language. Language is almost immortal, right? That's the way that humans communicate. And when you censor a word, quite often it's more likely to be used even more. I think that unfortunately, regardless of the form, that word is with us, and there's really not a lot that we can do beyond teach people acceptable spaces to use that word. If you're going to use the word, fine, but have a consciousness around you.
People of all different races see this differently. There are even other black intellectuals that would differ with my opinion, and that's okay. But the reality is that if it's offensive to some, then I think it's worth letting go.